My name is Sarah Zakaria, and I'm with the University of San Diego Alumni Association. Today, I'm going to introduce Jen Shiba. She is our programming chair of the Young Alumni Network, and she's going to introduce our speaker, Maureen Guarcello. Jen?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Jen Shiba. I'm the chair of the programming committee for YAN. We're part of the USD Alumni Association, and we're thrilled to have you join us today for our webinar and would like to welcome and thank Maureen in advance for her time. So just so you all know, the Young Alumni Network is a USD alumni affinity group, and we serve the needs of graduates within the last 10 years who are under 35. So thank you again so much for taking time out of your schedules to join us today. We just want to cover off a few details before we begin the webinar. First of all, we want to let you know that today's webinar is being recorded. So if you have to jump off at any point, then feel free to come back to the website in about a week, and the webinar will be uploaded for your enjoyment then. Also, there's a control panel on your screen where you can ask questions. Questions are very welcome. Maureen is really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So please submit your questions and we'll get to them as soon as we can. Also, if there are any technical difficulties as we're getting through the webinar, please submit your concerns through the question area. This way, if there are any problems, we can address it individually, and if we need to speak to everyone collectively, we can do that as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's presenter. Maureen is a USD alumna from the School of Leadership's Master's Program in Nonprofit Leadership and Management. She continues her studies at the School of Leadership and is now a third-year Leadership Studies doctoral student. Maureen started her career in higher education fundraising, marketing, and operations at Cal State Long Beach, the University of Hawaii, Kaplan, and UC San Diego. Throughout her work experiences at these institutions, she's developed a strong interest in the nonprofit sector and higher education, and she now specializes in research dedicated towards gender, technology, and leadership in a university setting. So welcome, Maureen. We now turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jen. And welcome, fellow Torero alumni. I'm so happy to be here this afternoon. I want to start off by going ahead and giving us an overview of our discussion today. I know that many of you have taken a quick break from work to be here, or perhaps you're having lunch or working on your email. I remember, when I was attending webinars on the regular, in addition to classes, that's how I did it. So please enjoy today's presentation, take away from it what resonates most with you. And just take the time to, you can see this first slide, the Leadership at Work slide is very simple, very clean, and has a nice picture on it. And you'll see that throughout the presentation. So hopefully you can take the time to just let those images settle in with you, take this time to do a little bit of reflection, and at the same time, I'll be giving you what I'm calling a pracademic approach to this presentation in terms of leadership at work. And pracademic is kind of a mashup. One of my mentors shared with me of the words practical and academic. On the practical side, I will be sharing with you some of my professional accounts. And we'll also hear from you through 3 anonymous polls that we'll be doing. So please respond when I mention them. Sarah Zakaria will be manning the deck on that one, the control deck on that one. But please respond to the polls when I mention them. They'll open up the group dialogue a little bit, and I'll also get a better sense of where you are in your career and really where you want to go. On the academic side, I'll be using the text Leadership on the Line, Staying Alive Through the Dangers of Leading. This book is by Ronald Heifetz and Marty Linsky. It's utilized in the Leadership Studies graduate courses here at USD, and it was written by 2 Harvard professors from the John F. Kennedy School of Government there at Harvard. The textbook is an easy read, and I recommend if you like what you hear during this presentation, go ahead and pick it up. It's available through Amazon. The polls, again, will begin at the opening of the slide, and they'll close at the end before I move on to the next slide. In terms of this slide and the notion of waiting to be seen, Your choice to be here today is an indicator that you are already taking ownership of your leadership development and that you're on the second slide, you'll see here, work, work, work. They couldn't do this without me. And I know that in the first 5 years, especially of my career, it was really easy to become disenfranchised with my work. The key there is to remember that your first and second jobs likely will not be your last. And with this, we'll go ahead and open the first poll and wait a moment for responses to understand a little bit more about how many years you've been working in your current role. So we have three options here for you: less than a year to 2 years, 3 years to 5 years, or 6 years or longer. And so I can see that we've got the 1 to 2 years here, definitely weighing in with the 1 to 2 years. And first through 5, those are the tough ones. That mentality, they couldn't do this without me. There's so much energy, there's so much excitement to get in there and make change. But unfortunately, due to the hierarchies, the way organizations are structured, you probably have a low level of formal authority, but a high level of perhaps informal authority, that water cooler talk, or you have a strong relationship with your coworkers outside of the workplace or even within the workplace. But when it comes to effectuating change, you probably experience an inability to do so, or you're finding roadblocks in that space. And I wish I was here chatting with all of you, because hopefully I've got some head nods out there. I know that that's what I experienced and continue to experience. We all go through that stage. You probably manage a few people, but you don't have full control over their staff duties and their direction, maybe even their development. You might not know much about the budget that you have. You might not even know what your budget is, but you're responsible for making changes within your area. These are generally small operational changes, and you find that you don't have the authority to make large-scale decisions. So you've also got this informal authority, which is undocumented authority, and that's social cachet. That's an extraordinarily frustrating place to be in. And I guess the point here is to just take this into consideration, reflect upon your energy and your excitement to effectuate change, and really concentrate on how you can make that change in other ways. And the formal authority, of course, will come over time. So the takeaway also is that they can do this without you, and they will. But the more you understand about the work that you do, and the more that you understand about yourself and your own professional development, the easier it will become to effectuate change within your organization without having that they, me mentality. We're going to transition on. Thank you so much for your quick responses here. It looks like we have 64, 26, and 8% split. So much for responding. We're going to move on to the next slide here. So the next question is, what is really going on? So can I lead during this time in my career? And as I mentioned before, yes, indeed, you can. The second poll, just to get a quick read, is where you consider your current position to reside within the hierarchy of your organization. So think for a moment about this. Are you an entry-level employee, a mid-level employee, or an executive-level employee? And the reason I ask this is, first of all, you need to just take a moment to reflect upon where you consider yourself, and you can respond in any way you choose to be within the organization. If you're in a very small organization, perhaps you have a mid to executive level role because there are 3 of you within the organization. If you're in a very large organization, in those first 5 1 to 6 years, you may have an entry level or a mid-level role. And the purpose of this poll isn't necessarily to get it right. The purpose of this poll is to give you a moment to reflect on where you are in your career and to really ground yourself in this notion. So we've got 37 or so percent of you, 39% of you are looking at entry level. And we've got a majority of you at 57% in the mid-level range. And then we've got about 3%, or we've got one individual here who's at the executive level, which is outstanding. It's not necessarily the end game. That's not where we're all headed. And so the purpose of this exercise is to give you an opportunity to really think about where you want to be and where you currently are within this organization and also within your career. Now, it's important to note that leadership doesn't necessarily equate to change, which means that you don't necessarily have to have that level of formal authority in order to effectuate change within your organization. Leadership is also not the same as authority. So be assured that you can indeed lead within your current role, whether you're starting your career at the entry level and that's where you continue on for the rest of your career. You can absolutely effectuate change and lead and be an effective, efficient, and excellent leader at any level within the organization. And I found that that was one of the most comforting pieces of information that was provided to me not only within the USD graduate school program, the master's program, and then the PhD program in leadership studies. This was also just a comforting notion that you can empower the individuals who may work for you one day, currently work for you, or whom you work for, and know that you do make a difference within your organization. Okay, so take that piece away with you and just consider where you are within your organization and also where you want to go. You also need to note that people are generally averse to rapid change. And so when you think about that, you have to think about the kind of changes that you're excited to make within your organization or within your current role right now. This is universal. Change, according to Heifetz and Linsky especially, represents loss, and the loss of old familiar ways especially. Now that's really important because you have to think about what impact the change that you're making within your organization, even if it's a very, very small change. With most of us in the workplace here, you look at the organization, if somebody moves the coffee maker in the break room, that could be massive change for some people who have habits and familiar ways. And so you have to think about what these changes represent. When we're a new hire and we're early on in the game and eager within our career, we're not as sensitive to this notion. We're also not as aware of the artifacts, the routines, the behaviors of the organization before we entered into the organization. And so we want to change things up. We don't really have a lot vested in the way things were. And this can be very dangerous to not have this perspective on the overall organization. So you have to consider this as you think about the changes that you want to make and how excited you are to move within the organization. You have to think about how this will impact others and how dangerous this can be to you in your role within the organization. This doesn't mean you should give up. This is the space for learning and development. This is the space for leadership. So you have to try to disconnect this notion that leadership is equal to change. And you have to also disconnect the notion that leadership is the same as authority, because authority is the, authorization to make changes and to do things within the organization. That doesn't necessarily make you a leader. So this is the space for learning and development. and I'll speak to all of you. These lessons are universal to all of us. I think that some of us further on in our careers or in the mid to executive level management area, these are also lessons that we need to be reminded of, because the individuals who report to you are going through this, and you're continually going through this as well. So there's always room for development and growth. So we've got a majority of mid-management here. We've got individuals from the 1st to the 6th year out, and we're going to move on to the next slide, where I'll explain to you exactly how you can effectuate this leadership from your current space, no matter what your role or your tenure are within the organization. And here we've got the Edison light bulb, the space between, and I've got two terms up there: technical capacity and adaptive change. So what this essentially means is that there are two types of challenges. There are technical challenges and there are adaptive challenges. And take a moment to think about this. I'll give you an example, actually. The March of Dimes was originally established to combat polio. It was founded in 1938 by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and it was founded when the fight against polio was at its peak, and it was accomplished in the United States for the most part. So we look at this organization whose primary mission was to combat polio, founded in 1938, and then you have to think about what their choices were next. An example of a technical change or a technical challenge could have been that this polio-related mission could have transferred into fighting polio abroad, or to just disband the organization entirely. But instead, the March of Dimes chose to change their mission towards babies' prenatal health and combating birth defects. So if you think about it, a technical change within this example would mean changing up behaviors or practices. Okay, just taking the current mission and applying it somewhere else. And an adaptive change is much larger than that. An adaptive change deals with people's hearts and minds. So then put yourself in the shoes of the people within that organization, the experts who specialized in polio research and vaccines, the relationships, the fundraising sources, all of the behaviors, the activities, and the sustainability of the March of Dimes since 1938, and how big that change had to have been in order to survive, essentially, as an organization, but also to shift the mission to babies' prenatal health and combating birth defects. And they're successful to this day in that regard. So you can see how this can be dangerous. You can see what certain members of that organization had to lose within that transition. And then you also see what the organization as a whole, in terms of its survival, had to gain from making that change. Another issue here is the very, very common mistake of trying to apply a technical solution to a deeply adaptive problem. And this is really easy to do because when you have an adaptive challenge in front of you, and if you're early on in your career, you might not even recognize it as such. You might not have all of the pieces of the scenario in order to understand that it's an adaptive problem to begin with. The second piece of it is, even if you do recognize it as an adaptive challenge, what do you do with that information? So if I'm the membership manager of an organization and we find that our membership numbers are declining, and my bottom line is to bring in members and membership dues, and I'm in the first 5 years of my career, do I create more campaigns in order to generate more membership for my organization? Or do I take this issue to my executive director and say, I'm not entirely sure that the mission of membership is really relevant anymore within the scope of our organization? Well, in the first 5 years of my career, I would definitely create more membership campaigns. And I'm sure that that's what a lot of us are doing from our seats right now. You'll also find that symptoms of using a technical solution to a deeply adaptive challenge will result in work avoidance. You'll find yourself becoming disenfranchised. Um, it starts to become work for the sake of work and a painful process. So just take a moment, consider what some of the challenges you face within your, from your seat and how you're addressing those issues. It's really important to consider. And as you consider those, you might find that you can follow a trail that this issue isn't only impacting your role, but it's impacting those of others within the organization. And then you really have to consider how you want to manage that issue. It might not necessarily be whipping up a solution or coming forth with a proposal, but opening a dialogue within that area could be very, very beneficial for the organization and an absolute opportunity for you to lead within your role. So we're going to move on to see how you can see yourself leading with this new information. Now, Heifetz and Linsky articulate a really interesting example. This is where do you see yourself, how to recognize the system and the parts. So what you want to do, just for the next couple moments, is to visualize yourself as a part of the organization. Chart. And then take a moment to view the organization as a whole. And now try to do both at the same time. And this is what Heifetz and Linsky call the dance floor and balcony concept. And the way they illustrate this is really interesting. They tell you to imagine that you're on a balcony. So you're in a ballroom perhaps, and you're looking down and people are dancing. And you try to visualize who's dancing with whom. Now this is obviously a metaphor for your organization. So who's dancing with whom? Who's standing on the sidelines? Who's attracting attention to themselves? Who's the guy doing the running man? Who's drinking punch? Who's eating? What are people doing? What are individuals within this organization doing? And you're up on the balcony looking down at them. And then what you try to do is imagine that you're down there on the dance floor with everyone else. And try to visualize what you're doing. How are you a part of this event? If you look down on the dance floor and you see the folks that you have lunch with on a regular basis down there dancing, that perhaps would be where you would gravitate. Or if you're not much of a dancer, maybe you stand with the guy on the sidelines, or you want to join the guy in the spotlight doing the running man. You need to take a moment to consider where you are, where you gravitate within your own organization and how you take part in events. And then the trick is to try to do both at the same time. Now, this is how you should practice experiencing your own organization, because this is how the organization works. When you're down on the dance floor dancing, you also need to be able to look at yourself within the organization as a whole. You need to be present to where everyone else is within the organization and have a real understanding of how all of those parts interact with one another. Because every action has an impact, and you need to know where you are and where everyone else is in order to remain for the most part, in a safe and secure place while affecting change. So an example here would be that you can't just shut the music off during the dance or change the song unless you have a very clear intention and reason for doing so, and then also have an agreement with the rest of the group. So just use that metaphor when you're in a meeting and look around the conference table if you're in a larger organization to get a sense of who always sits by whom, who goes to coffee together. How is this organization working, not just hierarchically not just organizationally, but also socially. And how does this system work together? Okay, so we're going to go on and we're going to move on to, and I know this is, I'm very aware that this is a lot of information. These are broad concepts. I'm challenging you to do the work in taking these broad concepts and try to apply them to yourself and your own organization. And I'm aware that that's a lot to take on from 1 to 2 p.m. here on, Pacific Standard Time. But really consider how this works in the future. Professional life has been so different um, since I joined the Leadership Studies program, but mostly since I started exercising some objective viewpoints of my own work and the work of my organization. So on this next slide, we have messages and boundaries and creating intentions and plans for our present and future. This brings us to our third and final poll. And I'm interested in whether or not you have a desire to move up within your current occupation. I've provided you 3 options. The poll will come up in a moment. I've provided you 3 options, yes, no, and looking at other occupations, but unsure about how to make a move or unsure about making a move. As I mentioned earlier, if we're in middle management, it's fine to remain in middle management. We don't all have to vie for the boss's seat. But at the same time, if you are interested in moving up, you need to really think about how you're behaving within your organization in order to do so. And I think a lot of us put our energy sometimes in the wrong places when we have this aspiration. So we've got about 60% really interested, moving up within the current organization. 12% of us, we're good. We're happy where we are. We've got learning to do within our current role, and that's fine by us. And then we've got about a quarter of individuals who are considering other occupations but unsure about making a move. We've got the paycheck. It's a decent paycheck. We're lucky to have it, especially in this economy right now. We're excited about that. So we're going to hang out for a little bit, see about perhaps maybe going on to get more education, certifications, and exploring the job market to see what other career paths might be out there. And that's perfectly normal. But for those of you who have a desire to move up within your current occupation, you need to be very clear about the messages you're sending and the boundaries that you're setting. Because when I remember that when I was really, really excited to move up quickly within my first organization. I was at Cal State Long Beach, and I was on the bottom rung. Um, I found it very, very difficult to say no to any task, to anything that was asked of me. And I found that I was starting to lose sight of what my mission and my role were within the organization. And then I also found that I started to somewhat morph into my role. So I was actually losing myself and my own personality within my desire to just completely embody my role within the organization. And that can be really dangerous. It can be also very hard on your psyche because if you take your work home with you or you take it everywhere with you in your head, you don't have a day off. You don't have a moment to do that reflection, that balcony dance floor exercise where you think about really where you are within the organization. And just thinking back to that second slide, they couldn't do this without me. It's very easy to fall into that trap, that notion that you are doing so many tasks within the organization that the organization simply could not function for you as an employee and as a professional. And as a growing professional, developmentally, it's difficult for you to see the big picture if you're doing all of the minutia within the organization because you feel or you sense that that adds value to your presence within the organization. Also absolutely true. It does add value. You are a valued member of the team. But if you think about our brief discussion about technical and adaptive change and challenge, those are definitely technical solutions to adaptive problems. So you've got this adaptive challenge. It's going to be years before you're able to really look back and have a robust reflection upon your professional career. And being the one who comes in on weekends or stays late at night, you're the last one out to shut off the light at night and the first one in to turn the light on in the morning, while admirable, is not necessarily the way for you to plan for your professional future and to move up within your organization. You can also find that you pigeonhole yourself because you are so valuable within that space that you aren't promoted because you hold all of those activities as part of your day-to-day duties. And who, from a leadership perspective, from a manager perspective, who would want to move the person who's doing all of these small tasks, small and important tasks into another role, and then have to find somebody to backfill all of that work. So just take a moment and consider that. The intention here, we're early on in our careers. We should be having fun. We should enjoy our work and our coworkers. We should enjoy our families and just the beginning of this process, the beginning of our what will likely be a very, very long career. It's so easy to become overwhelmed by the pressures to make adaptive changes. And now that you know what these are, you don't necessarily want to go hunting for them. People think that that's what they want. You might also hear, sense that adaptive change, that managers want adaptive change. Okay, we want a new brand and a new message and a new mission, and we need to change this up. We need to get with the times. We need to overhaul this program. And so you'll find that management think that they want massive change, but that's not necessarily what they want, because adaptive change does represent so much loss. I'll give you a quick example from my own career. I moved to the University of Hawaii to work with the 7 campuses there and bring the 7 alumni bodies under one brand. So 7 campuses, including community colleges, and 4 islands. Now, I was recruited and brought out there to the University of Hawaii with pretty much no cultural knowledge of the state of Hawaii, the culture of Hawaii, the people, or the campuses. And yet I did my job. I was very early on in my career. I was extraordinarily lucky to have this opportunity. And I look back now at that experience and just put my head in my hands because there was so much that I missed. There was so much that I didn't consider while I was going about that change. The the executive team, my board of directors wanted this change, which now you can recognize as a technical change. What should have resulted was some deep adaptive work in order to connect the 4 islands, in order to connect the 7 campuses in a very different way. And the main reason I put my head in my hands is because I never visited any of the campuses off of the island of Oahu. And you have to understand that these campuses were very, very diverse. They were very different. I was in close touch with the representatives from the University of Hilo, Their colors were red primarily. The University of Manoa, which is where I was located, uh, were green. They were the Warriors, or they are the Warriors. And we ended up going with kind of an aqua color scheme. And it was such a technical solution to such a deep adaptive problem. And we absolutely have to watch out for these. I was lucky. I made it out with my reputation intact, and came back to California for a number of reasons, including family and life. But you need to think back on those experiences and also those traps. It was a very, very attractive trap that I fell into. And to this day, if I could go back and change it up, if I could go back and apply the knowledge that I have now, I would, because it was extraordinarily difficult for those organizations to make it through that time. All right, so we'll go ahead and close this poll. And I wish you all the very best of luck as you apply for increasing levels of responsibility within your organization. And we're going to transition into trust and accountability. Now, trust and accountability are extraordinarily important within the workplace, of course. And the reason I want to talk about this is because when we talk about leadership and successful leadership, you have to know where people are. And when I say that, if you think back to the notion of adaptive change and loss, so this notion of changing behaviors or large-scale change that individuals might have something to lose in that transaction, you have to have a sense of where people are in that space. And Heifetz and Linsky talk about taking the temperature to see where people are. You also need to take the temperature to see where you are. Are you capable of initiating a large scale, and not only initiating, but stewarding a large scale change? And you need to take that temperature, talk to people, use your informal authority to your advantage at this juncture, because you get to a point where, and perhaps you discussed just a moment ago, but the quote unquote boss walks by and there's less inclination to be as open as we are. And so when we're in a middle management role, or we're in the entry level role, it's a lot easier to discuss this with our coworkers. There's not too much competition among coworkers in this space. And you can also get a real read on where people are. Are people ready for change? Are people excited about that? Or are you working with a number of people who are very happy with the position that they're in, with the space that they're in right now, and they're perfectly happy continuing on with that without any major changes? Perhaps they're starting a family and they're happy if, I'm getting my paycheck, I know my job, I understand my space, I understand my role. I don't want to have to think really hard about this. I want to come to work, do my job, and go home. Or are people excited? Do they want to change things up? Or are they a little bit of both? They recognize that the organization is on the brink of large change and that this does indeed need to happen. You've received the authorization to go ahead and implement some of this change. And for the individuals who you find to be a little bit more sensitive, or who have a little bit more to lose because of the change, you want to make sure that you stay in touch with those individuals, keep a positive relationship with those individuals, check in and make sure that that they're doing okay. I've been in an organization, well, I don't think I've been in an organization yet who didn't completely revamp the website. And on the marketing side of things, it's really fun to revamp a website, to rebrand an organization. You get to play with the colors and the fonts and the branding and taglines and whatnot. And your poor IT professionals are stuck with all of the coding and the database transitions and the bugs and rerouting the links. And, you know, if we have any IT professionals out there, you guys are snickering and spiting me for my marketing prowess over here. But it's different in different units within your organization. You have to consider how this is going to impact the people with your organization, within your organization. And this doesn't mean to stop change as a result, but you definitely need to be taking your IT guy to coffee to have a sense of what his workload is and where he is before you do a major overhaul of your website. You also coffee with the IT guy, partially chats with one another in an open dialogue, but also an understanding, a group understanding, an organizational understanding that change is indeed difficult and sometimes painful. You need to create a culture of trust. And this goes for small scale projects as well. When I started to work in the Department of Leadership Studies here at the University of San Diego, I wanted to take on a project that would demonstrate that I was there, that I was present, and making some sort of change within the organization, but I didn't want to disrupt other individuals within the organization with this awareness that there's a culture, there's a beat, a rhythm that is already going on within the organization. And I didn't want to disrupt that space, but I did want to introduce myself into it as a part of the organization. And so what I chose to do was to digitalize, create a Google digital library of our departmental materials. We have a ton of books, 2 donations from professors within our department, and there were over 1,500 books. And so with some help, I was able to, add the ISBN numbers into the Google Digital Library and create an online searchable library within the department. Now, this wasn't an epic change. We don't have a line out the door of people requesting to see and borrow books from our online library, but at the same time, it created a subtle environmental change. It created a new procedure. It added a little bit more information to this space, and I was able to introduce myself into that environment without disrupting it entirely. I also was able to buy myself some time to learn more about the culture of the organization without causing major disruption. So you want to consider how you can effectuate this type of change without making a major disruption within the organization. Kind of test it, if you will. Take it to the lab for a little bit and find a small scale project that does effectuate change, but gives you a better read on where people are. And you can kind of on a small scale test creating holding environments, taking the temperature, understanding where people are within your organization. And this will help you exercise your ability to understand the concepts of trust and accountability. And then you can go forward with larger scale projects from there. Okay, I think we're on the home stretch here. Hopefully you guys are still with me. This next slide with the flamingos on it says, inspiring others, it is a system after all. And throughout the past 40 minutes, we've talked a lot about, or I have talked a lot about this being a system and how you're part of a system and you're a singular entity within this larger system. And this is how you lead. This is where it happens. Taking all of this information together and not necessarily being the first person to talk at every meeting or the individual who says the most. You don't even have to speak at all. If you're doing this work, if you're taking the time to reflect regularly upon your own leadership style, upon where you reside within the organization, how you communicate with other individuals within the organization, and how you're creating these holding environments, this trust, accountability, and doing this work. This is where you will find you are able to effectuate change. This is where you will find leadership takes place. And there are a lot of different definitions of leadership. I choose to understand leadership as an activity, an action, not necessarily something you are. So that would refute the Heifetz and Linsky notion that you are your role. So you can't take your role home with you. I'm not necessarily a leader at home, but I do exercise leadership on a regular basis. And then there are some times when I'm not exercising leadership. So you can definitely adopt your own notion of leadership, your own definition of leadership, and that's how you will enact leadership. That just happens to be how I choose to exercise it and to understand the definition. It being a system, you need to keep track of your allies, and you need to also be in very close touch with your opposition. So your allies typically have the least to lose. Those are and your opponents, the people who are going to speak up and really not necessarily buy into what this large scale change will be. Those are the individuals who will typically have the most to lose within the transaction or within the change. You need to keep in touch with both ends of the spectrum. You'll gain the most knowledge from knowing who is with you and why. Um, and that might even illustrate that you are doing something for the wrong reasons. The individuals who agree with you might raise some issues that this direction isn't necessarily the best direction for the organization. Also, you want to find out who doesn't agree with you and why. What are their reasons for not agreeing with you or agreeing with the direction that you as a group are considering taking. This is important also because you don't want to get too far. What is it? You keep your friends close and your enemies closer. This is an example of not necessarily making enemies within your workplace, but really considering the opinions and the standpoint of the individuals who disagree with the direction that you're taking the organization. All right, the second to last slide here has to do with it being a process and constantly learning, teaching, assessing, and adjusting. This is not a binary process. This is not, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to engage in this small scale, mid scale, large scale change, and the train doesn't stop at any point from here. You have to constantly take in information, consider teaching, communicating, assessing, and adjusting your goals, your outcomes, your path, your process throughout the entire time. Because if you just set certain assessment measures, so for example, if you're just using measurement in terms of dollars or memberships or student yield or whatever it is that you are in charge of accruing or working those numbers down or working them up. Measuring those numbers may not yield the answers you are looking for when you are leading a change effort. This is really important to understand because you'll still need to account for the technical details. You'll still need to account for the time that you've spent, the money that you've spent, the programming efforts that you've made, the attendance perhaps, or the public response to your change effort. Tracking the temperature of your organization and the happiness of your people, your coworkers, and yourself, you're losing track of the overall goals. So you need to track your own reasoning. You need to remember that stay on the balcony and the dance floor view and you need to make changes as needed. It's not a static world, and unfortunately, it's not a static workplace. And to wrap up this afternoon, unless you guys have questions, we have the ability to hold the technical and the adaptive. And so you have an initial understanding of what the technical and the adaptive are. I say that the flame will remain. You have to be passionate about your work. I am blessed to be in the place that I'm in. I left my full-time work at UC San Diego to take this enormous plunge into a full-time doctoral program and was awarded a scholarship and a part-time role here at University of San Diego. And I love every moment of the work that I do. I am extraordinarily passionate about my work. But even with that passion, even with that excitement, I still understand these concepts, take them with me everywhere I go, keep this language with me everywhere I go so I don't confuse myself with my role, and so I can keep those boundaries working for me. And this could be hard if you're not sitting here at the University of San Diego. This could be hard if your job is to rent cars or sell paper products. You have to try to locate a kernel of passion within your work. If that's not necessarily the work that inspires you right now, why do you do what you do then? And as long as you can locate why you do what you do, if it puts food on the table, if it keeps a roof over your head, if it keeps your children in school and happy and clothed, then that's why you do what you do. And it doesn't matter if it's paper or cars or, whatever it is that you do for a living. But you really have to think about what it felt like when you applied for the position, when you interviewed for the position, and when you received the news that you were hired. Try to locate that space and practice returning to the places of origin and continue planning for the future. So thank you for taking this time to invest in your career and your leadership practice. I'm pleased to be with you for this hour, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have at this time. If not, please enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week.
Thank you, Maureen. Please type in your questions in the chat area, and I will relay them to Maureen, and she'll answer them. One question that we had is from one of our Maureen.
That's very astute, Gabriel. I would say that this is a very mindful practice in the sense that this is academic. You'll find that although I'm using a text, there's a very personal and mindful practice that needs to be exercised while you're doing this. And this isn't necessarily connected to faith or a meditation practice. If you have those practices, that's excellent. Continue to do so and just work some of these intentions and setting these intentions into that practice. But this is a very mindful exercise. Absolutely, Gabriel.
Wonderful. I have another question. If we are considering an education doctoral program, how do we know when the right time is to go into that program?
I can answer that just from my personal position, and you need to consider also what, I think this is Adriana, you need to consider from your personal perspective when it's right for you. I had just finished the first year of my master's program in nonprofit leadership and management. I was very happy with the process. I had always worked in nonprofit organizations up until that point, and after the first year, I looked at my resume and said, no, I've always worked in higher education. I need to receive a terminal degree, and I want to dedicate the rest of my career to studying and understanding higher education and higher education administration. For you, it'll be a very different process, but I'd be happy to chat with you offline about your personal path.
Great, thank you so much, Maureen. If you can advance to the next slide, Jen will give our closing commentary.
Great, thank you everyone so much for your questions and for your participation.